Arranging music is way easier than you think it is. While it is true that topics like orchestration and instrumentation can be challenging to learn, most professional orchestrators and arrangers will tell you that it's less about what you know and more about having a reliable workflow for getting your ideas out of your head and into your DAW. In this workshop, we are going to learn 4 simple steps that you can immediately apply to start arranging your own music, regardless of genre. We'll learn about sketching your initial ideas, creating a map for your arrangement, figuring out a basic sound, and of course fine-tuning your music and adding the final touches. So with that, let's get started. Step 1 is to start by making a basic sketch of your music. Alright, so this step is relatively simple and has more to do with melody writing than arranging. So we're just going to cover a few quick tips before moving on. If you want to learn more about melody writing, I recommend checking out my playlist Melody Writing for Composers, or signing up for my free online class on melodic form and structure. I'll have the links to both in the description of this video. But for now, we can loosely define musical structure as the number and order of different themes that are used in a piece of music. For example, AABA structure would describe a piece of music that contains 2 distinct melodies, melody A and melody B. In this structure, melody A gets played twice before melody B is introduced, and then the whole thing ends with just one last statement of melody A. Now, this may seem simple, but if each melody is 8 bars long, then you'll end up with a full 32-bar piece of music, not including any intro that you might write. Admittedly, there is a bit more I could say about structure, but for now, this simple definition should work just fine. When you are arranging a new piece of music, you can use all sorts of inspiration for your musical form. You can use traditional and popular forms as a starting point, structures like AABA or ABA-BCB. If you're working with lyrics, you can use them to inform the structure of your song. And, of course, if you are a media composer, then you want to rely on the various scenes and stories that you're scoring to inform your structure. For example, I was recently hired to write the soundtrack for another play. In the script, I've been given the lyrics for a new requiem that I need to compose. The lyrics for the first movement of the requiem go like this: Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison. What mercies await in the darkest night. When strength fails, will you carry me toward the light? Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison. Now, my librettist has been generous enough to give me a bit of leeway with the lyrics. He's allowing me to make subtle changes so long as I keep to the spirit of the words. So, with this in mind, I decided to work with a simple ABA structure. I need to write an A theme for the first stanza, the Kyrie Christe Kyrie. And I need to create a B theme for the second stanza, the What mercies await in the darkest night. But since the third stanza repeats the original lyrics, I can just return to the A theme again, maybe this time with a few changes here and there to keep things interesting. This structure functioned as a guide for me as I began sketching out the melody and chords for the music. And after a little bit of work, I was able to come up with a simple sketch like this. Now, for the sake of time, I have sped up the tempo quite a bit so we don't have to sit through the whole thing, but let's give it a quick listen. So regardless of how you decide on an appropriate structure, the very first step to arranging music is to first sketch out the different themes that you're going to need and then arrange them in a proper order. It doesn't take much and it doesn't need to be complicated. All you need is a melody, chord progression, and bass line for each theme. Once you've done this, you are ready to move on to step number 2, which is mapping out your arrangement. Step 2 is where things start to get a little more complicated. Armed with a basic sketch for your musical structure, you need to start thinking about how different instruments and textures will be used to bring your vision to life. The first thing to consider is your sound palette. Similar to how a painter's palette holds all of their different colors and paints, your sound palette is the selection of different instruments and playing techniques that you can choose from while arranging your new piece. A sound palette can be as simple or as complex as you'd like. Sometimes it's honestly just as simple as whatever instruments are common for the style you're writing in, or maybe which sound libraries you own, or maybe even which instruments are available in your band. But other times, creating a sound palette can be a deeply creative and rewarding process, just as nuanced as composing or orchestrating. These sound palettes are what make movies like Interstellar, Dune, and Oppenheimer so iconic. But regardless of your approach, it's always a good idea to take at least a little bit of time to create a list of which instruments or playing techniques you want to use before mapping out a new arrangement. For example, when planning the arrangement for my sketch, I decided on using a super simple sound palette consisting of just strings and choir. I'm allowing myself to consider pipe organ, orchestral percussion, and a few other instruments for the other movements of the Requiem, but for now, strings and choir are my main focus. These are the instruments that I can choose from when planning out my arrangement of the Kyrie. Having this planned out ahead of time helps focus my ideas while arranging the music and keeps me from getting frozen by choice paralysis. This is particularly important if you happen to own a ton of different sound libraries and synths. But once you've taken the time to figure out your sound palette, the next step is to map out the climax of your new piece. The climax of your music is the focal point of your piece. It's typically a moment where your music feels the biggest. All other sections of your music will either build towards or away from your climax. And when planning your climax, you want to first identify which section of your music will serve this important role. Then you can take some time to describe the strategies you want to use to make it feel climactic. A few very common examples are reaching the largest size of instrumentation, or maybe the loudest dynamics. You can use the most octaves or registers. Maybe arrive at a suddenly simple but still powerful texture after spending lots of sections just getting gradually more and more complex. Maybe your climax is the most rhythmically active moment of the music, or maybe you arrive at a key change. You can try using as many of these options as you'd like, or possibly coming up with new original ideas of your own. The main goal here is to come up with a brief list of ideas for how you want this section to sound more climactic than all of the others. For example, in my music, I know that the climax needs to take place right at the end of the music, in the final Kyrie. The reason why has to do with the script that I was given for the story, and it's as simple as that. So, when planning out my climax, I decided on just a few parameters that I thought would be helpful and important to make this moment sound larger than all of the others. Number one is I just want this to be the largest size, across instrumentation and or possibly the number of octaves or registers that I'm using. Number two, I want this section to have the loudest dynamics. And number three, I want it to involve some kind of key change. Maybe not changing the key right at this moment just because it's so close to the end, but at the very least, I want this section to be in a different key than it was originally in the first A section. And that's all it really takes. You don't need to start picking instruments just yet. All you need to do is identify where your music will feel the most climactic and take a few moments to describe why it feels that way. Once you've got that taken care of, the next step is to start going section by section or phrase by phrase throughout your sketch and mapping out how you're going to reach this point. Creating the map for your arrangement involves taking quick notes on how each section or phrase will bring you closer or further away from the climax. And this is why it's important to start by planning the climax first. Specifically, you want to start planning on how the size and complexity or energy of each section will either increase or decrease when compared to the section that comes before it. Planning the size of your music is pretty straightforward. All you're going to do is ask yourself, how does each section need to compare to the one before and after it? If you have a specific story in mind, or maybe a specific scene that you're trying to score, this information can be pretty self-evident. The size of your music just needs to grow or shrink to match the energy of the story. For example, In my sketch, section A consists of 3 short phrases, while section B consists of just 2. In section A, phrase 1, I want to start very small. I'm talking super intimate. This way, it not only fits the description of the music in the script, but it will also give me plenty of space to grow as well and make the climax sound even bigger in comparison. Section A, phrase 2, is going to start to grow. I mean, it's still going to be small, but I want to start actively increasing the size of my music here. Then, finally, section A, phrase 3, is going to continue my pattern of growth by forming a much stronger and larger sound. I want this phrase to feel almost as climactic as the actual climax of my music. Then in section B, phrase 1, I'm going to bring the music back down almost dramatically to a much smaller size to once again follow the story that I'm trying to tell with this music. And I can just continue this process until I have mapped out the size for every single phrase in my sketch. The ultimate goal here is to create a map of how the music needs to develop before you begin writing out the actual arrangement. And this is going to help save you so much time and give you a plan to work with that can help keep you on track when working with a tight schedule. As you fill out your map, take some notes on which basic strategies you plan on using to make each section sound bigger or smaller. Will you change the instrumentation, the dynamics, the number of registers, the texture, etc., etc., etc.? There's no need to get super specific here, all right? You're just writing down some basic ideas or strategies. As a tip, you want to keep in mind the specific strategies that you wrote down for your climax. Which parameters of your music will make it sound bigger than all of the others? How can you manipulate these same parameters to control the size of the other sections? So, for section A, phrase 1, I know that I need a super intimate and small size. Since my climax plans on using instrumentation size, number of registers, and dynamics as important parameters, one super easy way to get started is to just say super small instrumentation, minimum number of registers and layers, and quiet dynamics. Naturally, to start growing in section A, phrase 2, I can just start adding more instruments, more layers, and just start increasing the dynamics. And I can continue this very simple pattern until I've mapped out the entire piece in regards to size. The next step is to do the same exact thing, but for complexity and movement. How does the amount of movement and complexity change for each section? Once again, just ask yourself the same question. How does each section need to compare to the ones before and after it? Do you want a section to be more complex or more simple than the one that comes before it? Once again, start taking notes on the specific strategies you're using to control the amount of complexity. How does your rhythm, your tempo, texture, etc. change in each section to help increase or decrease the amount of energy in your music? One of the simplest and most impactful of these options is texture, which is just simply the number and types of different layers you have in your music. So, for example, in section A, phrase 1, I need an intimate and small size. So I think keeping things simple is a really good idea. Texture-wise, I'm just going to work with a melody and simple bass line. Then, in section A, phrase 2, I can help contribute to the growth by fleshing out my texture a bit more. Maybe in addition to increasing the instrumentation and dynamics, I can start adding some harmonic accompaniment as well. Just like the size, I can continue moving section by section and phrase by phrase, taking simple notes on what kinds of tools I want to use to manipulate the complexity and movement in my music. As you work on your map, you can also take notes on any additional information you think is important. Things like key changes or shifts in instrumentation style, etc. The cool thing about this step is that you can take as much or as little time as you'd like. A detailed map can be a lifesaver when faced with writer's block, but sometimes simple notes like get bigger are more useful when you find yourself in a state of flow. However, for now, I recommend spending as much time on this step as possible. Learning how to make a quality map can make or break an arrangement and help you get more experienced and skilled as an orchestrator. One super simple way to get better at mapping arrangements is to just listen to your favorite music. As you listen, take notes. How does the composer manipulate size and movement in each section of your music? What strategies do they use to manipulate the energy and flow of the music? The more time you spend listening to music and taking notes, the more ideas you're going to have when you start arranging your own music. Now, regardless of however much time you spend on creating your map, once you have your sound palette, your climax, and the general shape of your arrangement mapped out, you're ready to move on to step 3. Step 3 is where we finally get started on more stereotypical orchestration. By using your map as a guide, you can start creating a basic arrangement of your music. The goal here is to focus on simply picking the primary sound that you want for each layer in each of your sections. Don't worry about getting too detailed or about creating smooth transitions between sections just yet. You can do that in step 4. But for now, you just want to move section by section and layer by layer, choosing the instruments to play each part. Personally, I like to move one layer at a time. I'll generally start with a melody. I'll start by taking a moment to think about the general vibe or emotion that I want to evoke with my music. For this requiem, I definitely want to start with the sound that is intimate, solemn, and mournful. Once I know the vibe I want, I can review my sound palette and create a list of all the instruments I think can pull this off. For this piece, the violin, the cello, and the choir all stood out to me as possible options. From there, it's just a simple matter of working through the process of elimination. I'll take a closer look at the specific melody that I've written, and I'm going to remove any instruments from my list that can't play this specific part and deliver the kind of emotional performance that I want. Sometimes the range isn't a good fit, or maybe the dynamics are less than ideal, or maybe one of the instruments just isn't agile enough to play the part. It really doesn't matter. Just come up with as many reasons as you can to eliminate as many options as possible until you're left with just a few finalists. For this specific piece, I have lyrics that need to be sung in the melody, so that automatically eliminates the violin and the cello, leaving me with just the voices. From here, I know that I need the basses to sing the bass line, so that leaves me with the sopranos, altos, and tenors as my final options. Once you're down to your final options, the final step is to just pick one. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, as long as your instrument is capable of delivering the type of emotional performance you need, and physically capable of performing the part you've written. It really just comes down to personal preference. Since this requiem is, at its core, a story about two brothers, I decided to go with the tenors. Reusing this process for each phrase as needed, I'm just going to simply move through my sketch and select the instrument or instruments that I want to use to perform the melody, making sure to follow my map along the way. Of course, instinct is more important than intellect when it comes to writing music. So, if you come up with an idea while you're writing, and you really like it, but it doesn't follow your map, feel free to experiment and just see how it sounds. Your map is a tool, all right? It's meant to help you avoid writer's block. It's not meant to be taken as law or written in stone unless absolutely needed. But regardless, once I have arranged my melody, I'm going to use the exact same process to flesh out my bass line, and then my chords and counter melodies, other accompaniments, etc., etc. I will follow this process as many times as needed until I have fleshed out my arrangement one layer and one section at a time. If you took the time to create a detailed map back in step 2, you're going to be amazed how quickly and smoothly this step can go. Once you have finished step 3, you are welcome to call it a day and take a break, or you can move on to step 4. Step 4 is to revisit your basic arrangement and make some touch-ups. The best way to do this is to just take a break from writing. All right, work on different projects or listen to some other music for a while. Because if you've been working on your arrangement for a while, your ears will have grown accustomed to the sound, and they won't be as detail-oriented as you need for adding the final touches. So you'll want to take a break and refresh your ears before you can revisit the arrangement and start making adjustments. Once you're ready, you'll want to listen and re-listen to your arrangement. Take additional notes on anything that sticks out to you as needing to be smoothed out or adjusted. Typically, I'll export my music arrangement as an MP3 file and just listen to it on my phone while going for a walk. I'll listen to it on repeat and take a few simple notes on my phone. Things like, the transition after phrase 3 is too sudden, I need to smooth it out. Or maybe, there's too much dissonance going on around 2 minutes and 13 seconds. Figure out what's going on there. When you're taking notes, don't worry about second-guessing yourself. All right? If you think section B could use a simple crash, then write it down. No idea is too simple or too silly, all right? You're just looking for ideas that come instinctively on how you can improve your music. Once you're ready, you can revisit your arrangement and start making changes. Then repeat the whole process as many times as necessary until you're satisfied with the final result. Every piece is different and every composer's tastes are unique. But a few common things that you can listen for are 1. Moments where the balance of your music sounds off. So maybe your chords sound too quiet or your melody too loud. 2. Transitions that sound too sudden or not impactful enough. 3. Any important moments or beats that don't feel like they hit quite as hard as you want. Or maybe they hit too much and you want them to be a little more subtle. 4. Any moments where the music feels a bit empty or just lackluster. And 5. Any moments where you think percussion or other instruments could be added. As usual, the types of changes you make are limited only by your imagination and your skill level. So the more practice you get and the more music you listen to, the more experience you'll build for yourself. So now that we've explored the 4 steps I use for arranging music, let's listen to the final arrangement for my sketch. The audio you're about to listen to is the audio that I sent to the writer of the play I'm scoring. My arrangement got approved and it's going to be a part of the final soundtrack. The next step is going to be recording it with an actual choir. While we're listening, I'm going to include notes taken from my arrangement map on the screen, so you can see what notes I took and how I used them to bring the arrangement to life. The 4 steps that we just learned in this workshop can go a long ways to helping you get started arranging your own music by establishing a reliable workflow. However, the specific decisions you make while arranging music are going to be limited by your imagination and your skill level. So make sure that you keep listening to lots of music, take notes on what you hear, and of course, study things like instrumentation and orchestration. For the last 2, I recommend checking out my free online classes on instrumentation and arranging, both of which you can find on my website, tabletopcomposer.com. Just go to the Academy tab and sign up for whichever classes you like. You can also find my ebooks and notes/slides that I make for videos like this one. I want to take a quick moment to thank my wonderful patrons who make these videos possible. I appreciate each and every one of you more than you know. So until next time, my friends, keep studying, keep working hard, and keep writing new music. I will see you all in the next video.